Hello and welcome back. And in this video, we're going to be talking about Refreshable in SwiftUI. So Refreshable modifier in SwiftUI provides a way to allow users to manually refresh the content of a view. When this is added, the view adds a pull to refresh functionality to initiate the refresh function. Now, the Refreshable modifier itself has this signature where you have a refreshable and there is an action that you provide which is type sendable, and it's an asynchronous operations. So refreshable modifier basically requires an asynchronous closure that's executed when the view needs to be refreshed. For most views, you will need to manually trigger the refresh and provide the UI element necessarily, but if you have a list view, then you can automatically refresh with the pull down functionality. Now, this shows a progress indicator during the process when the refresh is going on. Now, let's create a simple list view that displays the data from state variable containing a collection of strings, and we will use refreshable modifier to update the state variable with new data fetched from an asynchronous function called fetch data from API. And then we're gonna see how this actually functions. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me remove this, and we are going to get started with a state property. So we're going to create a state property called data. This is going to be an array of string, and we're going to initialize this. So it's going to be an empty string to start off with, and then we're going to, inside the body, we're going to first create a navigation stack. Okay, inside the navigation stack, we're going to create a list. This list is going to iterate over data that we have created, which is a string collection. And we're going to ID this by self. And we're going to have each item in the dictionary available inside the list closure. We're going to simply take that item and display it inside a text view. Okay, now we're going to add refreshable. So refreshable modifier is added directly onto the view. So in this case, it's going to be added to the list, and we're going to say self.data is equal to, and we're going to await on a function that has not been created yet. So we're going to create in a minute from API. And this function is going to be an asynchronous function. And before we move away from this, let's go ahead and give this a title, a navigation title as well. And the navigation title is going to be DevTechie courses. And these courses are available at devtechie.com. So we're going to create a function here, and this function is going to be fetch data from API. So let's go ahead and copy this so we have like the exact same name. This is going to be an async function returning a collection of string. Now what we're going to return is basically some of the courses that we have available on devtechie.com. So if you want to check them out, go ahead and visit devtechie.com and you'll find them there. But we have mastering Swift data, mastering SwiftUI, and practical code data. There's some examples. There are like a bunch of courses out there. Okay, so with that function in place, and we are populating the data on pull to refresh, we're ready to go refresh our preview screen to see if we can actually fetch data asynchronously using the refreshable modifier. Okay, I'll let the preview load and then resume the video as soon as it's loaded. Okay, so our preview is loaded, and now you can see we don't see anything. The reason is our list initially is empty. There is nothing in the list. But if we pull to refresh, notice that we actually get this progress indicator, and also our courses are populated with the data that we've actually provided. So pulling down from on the list actually fetches or initiates that refreshable action and fetches all the data from the API. In this case, we are actually getting it from this local array, but it can be a remote API. Okay, now one thing to notice is we are not wrapping this call inside a task or any other async block. Basically, the reason is Refreshable itself is asynchronous in nature. That means it can call data on asynchronous functions, and then it can basically await on those functions staying on the main thread. So it automatically switches for us on the main thread and allows us to fetch all the data. So even if we are actually on the background thread, Refreshable adds that functionality to move it back on the main thread so it can be used by the view. And for this reason, we don't need to use any task or any other block that actually are helpful for those cases where we are using async and await APIs. Okay. Now, because Refreshable once again uses async await, you don't need a task block for asynchronous functions. Now let's create a simple app that will actually fetch data from the internet, from the API, and we are basically going to display whatever is being fetched inside a list. Okay, so the API endpoint that we are going to use is called advice slip. So let me go ahead and show you this. So it's called api.advice slip. Okay, and what this API does, it actually gives you a random advice. Okay, so let me go ahead and pull up the website. So this is the endpoint. We are using this endpoint, advice slip /advice, which is going to give us random advice. So let's go ahead and click on this, and as you can see, there is the advice right there printed for us. When you are at a concert or event, enjoy the moment, enjoy being there, try leaving your camera in your pocket. That's pretty good advice. And you can refresh and you get basically new advice. Don't be afraid of silly ideas. That's another great one. So we're going to be using this API to actually fetch random advice from the endpoint and gonna list them out on our view. Okay, now if you notice that we have a certain format of JSON that actually we receive. So our JSON is received in a slip. This is the property value, and then there is another dictionary embedded into that which has ID property, advice property. So it has all the necessary components that we need. The JSON data basically describes a single slip of advice. The slip object has two properties: ID, which is an integer representing a unique identifier for the advice, in this case it's 40, and then a string that contains the actual advice. In this case, it's basically never run with scissors. Now what we're going to do with this is we will create a corresponding model struct to parse this JSON into Swift type. Now this model will conform to Codable protocol. Codable protocol in Swift provides an easy way to encode and decode custom types to and from JSON. Okay, it can also work on plists or any other formats. Now this makes it simple to work with structured data like JSON in your apps. Let's go ahead and create our model here. So we already have import from Foundation. Actually, we don't need import from Foundation, but let's go ahead and import it just in case. We're going to create a struct, and the struct is going to be called advice. It's going to be conforming to, once again, Codable protocol, which is a combination of decodable and encodable. For simplicity, we use Codable. We can use decodable as well. Now this is going to follow this structure right here. So if you notice, the first thing that we have is a slip. So we're going to create a slip. Okay, slip is going to be of type slip. We don't have a slip type available yet, so let's go ahead and create that. once again, this is going to be another codable type, and now we have slip available. So as soon as data actually arrives, our JSON decoder has a way to decode this slip into this Swift type, because we have that type available. Now this type, the slip type, has two properties, ID and advice. So let's go ahead and create an ID of type int and advice of type string. Okay, so we have two types available now, and now this two properties available now within slip, and this now represents the entire slip struct right here, this structure, and the entire JSON response is now represented by this guy, advice, right here. Okay, so once we have our model ready, next we will create a network client to send a request to an API. Now we will design this client using generics. Generics allows us to fetch data of any type that conforms to codable protocol. That's how we can actually define this. And this approach ensures the flexibility and enables the client to work with various data models while simplifying the process of retrieving that data from any API endpoints. So in this case, we can define, basically, we are going to create our network client, which is going to be used, like, not only in this use case, but you can actually use it within your app for different kind of model that you have. You don't have to use it with the advice or slip model. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that. For this, we're going to first import combine, because we're going to be using combine for network operation. We're going to create a final class that makes it easy at the compile time, where compiler actually knows that this class is not being inherited by somebody else. That means it can actually store the reference and make the compilation a little bit faster. So it actually improves the performance of your app. So final class network client, and we're going to create a singleton for this. So let's create a shared instance for network client. And then we're going to create a function called request. Now this request is going to expect a generic type, and generic type is going to be called T. You can call it whatever you want. This is our own name that we can, or letter that we can define, and this is going to be decodable. So the condition for this type T is that it needs to conform to decodable protocol. Now because we are conforming, or our advice and slip, they are conforming to codable protocol, which is a combination of encodable and decodable, that means this requirement is going to be satisfied. Now this request function is going to expect a URL and a type to be passed in. So URL of type URL, type, which is going to be t.type. Okay, so basically this is passing the type, so we can use that with inside the JSON decoder. We can use that type to pass, like, what kind of data we are decoding, and that's why we're expecting the type to be passed in. And this particular function is going to return any publisher of type T, and if there's any error that might have occurred on the way. Okay, now we're gonna basically have this type is capital T. There we go. Okay, now we're gonna use URL session, and URL session has a shared session which actually gives us access to data task publisher, and we're gonna pass our URL into this. So we have our URL we are passing. Now this URL session data task publisher is gonna fetch the data, and now it needs data to be mapped somewhere, and we're going to map this data to data's data value. Okay, so we are actually extracting that data value, and then we are passing it to the decoder. Okay, now decoder in this case is a JSON decoder. This is what we're going to actually pass here, JSON, not JSON, JSON decoder. And then here is going to be t.self. Okay, so this is where we are actually expecting the type to be passed in, and we're using that type to expect, like, what kind of object this decoder is gonna translate the JSON data into. Okay, now we want to receive this on dispatch queue dot main. Okay, we want to receive this on the main thread, and we're going to erase this to any publisher. Okay, and this actually completes our network client implementation. Once again, this is reusable. Basically, you can reuse this anywhere you want within your own application. This network client will work because we are actually creating it in a generic way. Now let's go ahead and build an observable view model, which is going to fetch advice from the API. So we're going to use the observation framework. Let's go ahead and import observation. We're going to start by marking this next class as observable. We're going to create a final class called refresh view model. And this refresh view model is going to have a private variable called cancellables, which is going to be a set of any cancelable. Next, we are going to have the advice, which is going to be an advice with a slip. Okay, and we're gonna create a slip with an ID 0 and advice as empty. This is just an initial object that we are creating in order to basically create our object. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to create our initializer, and this initializer is going to call a function called fetch advice. Fetch advice is a function that's not been created yet, so let's go ahead and create that. And this function right here is going to basically, first of all, have a URL. So let me paste the URL right here, a URL object that we're going to create using the advised endpoint URL. And then we're going to call our network client. We're going to tap into its shared singleton instance. We're going to make a request for the URL that we have created. The type is going to be advice.self. Okay, now we can actually use the sync operator from combine to receive the completion. Basically what we get is the completion, which gives us access which gives us access to basically the data that we are actually getting. So first one is the completion. So let's see, completion. Okay, this completion, we actually will learn if there was an error that was thrown or if we actually finished processing and received a successful response. So we're gonna basically switch on this, on the completion, and we're gonna say if there was a failure, then take that error and then print that error into the console. So error dot localized description. And if the response was finished successfully, we want to simply print finished. That's it. Okay. Now we also receive a value received, and then we actually have we actually get the advice. Okay, so the receive value, we will receive the advice. Now since we are going to be referencing self in this case, and in order to prevent a memory retain cycle from our view model, we want to first capture the self, a weak reference of self. Okay, and then we're gonna have our data model, which we're gonna basically receive in the receive value, and we're gonna take self.advice and populate that with the data model that we have received as a part of this call. Now notice that we are actually getting this error that result of this call is unused. The reason for that is because we are actually applying sync, but as soon as we get out of the scope for this function call, the memory is going to be released. That's how basically the combine framework works. So in order to prevent that, we're going to basically store the reference in a cancelable, and we have already created this cancelable. So what's going to happen is when this class is deallocated, at that point, all the cancellables are going to be canceled. So all the requests are going to be canceled, but till that time, the memory is going to be retained and your app is going to work the way it is expected to work. Okay, so with that change, let's go ahead and use this inside our view. So we're going to go back in our view, and in our view right now, we are referencing this data. So we're going to actually comment this out. So let's go ahead and create a new state variable, and this time we're going to reference the view model, create like an object for view model, and this is going to be our refresh view model. Okay, and now once we have instance for our view model, we're going to use that inside the list. Okay, so once again, I'm going to comment this out, and just going to comment it out for reference purposes when you get the code base. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing it here. So list, and inside the list, we are going to simply have a text, which is going to reach out to the view model, take the advice, get the slip, and basically print the advice from that. And let's go ahead and change the font for this guy as large title. Now inside the refreshable, we are going to simply have our view model, and we're going to call fetch advice. Okay, let's wait for our preview to load, and as you can see, we are getting a new advice. So turn jeans inside out. That's perfectly great. Let's make another one. So we just made the request and we got the response back. We can keep doing it, and you will actually see a different random advice every time we pull to refresh. Okay. All right. So currently we are displaying only a single piece of advice. Let's modify our code a little bit, and we will go ahead and display collection of advice. So basically we're going to retain the previous advices that we have received, or previous advice that we have received, and with the most recent one that we have fetched from the API, we're going to add that on the top. Now to do that, we're going to make an update to our view model, and instead of storing a single value, which is a single advice, we're going to basically store a collection of advice. Okay, so let's go ahead and work with this. So start working with the refresh view model, and we're going to see some errors. So as we create the code, all the errors are going to go away. So we're going to start with variable called advice collection, and this is going to be an array of advice initialized with an empty value. Fetch advice is going to stay same. Okay, then what we're going to do is inside the receive value, instead of replacing with the data model, we're going to simply say take the collection, insert an element at 0th index. So basically insert, we are not talking about collection, we're talking about a single advice. So data model at 0th index, which is going to basically add this advice at the top. Okay, so let's see if we are actually making sure. Okay, there we go. So we have optional weak reference for the self, and then we are reaching out to our advice collection and inserting at the 0th index. Okay, so these are the changes on the view model side. Let's go ahead and update the view to use the advice collection now. So we're gonna go up to our view, okay, and we are going to change the way our list has been created. So once again, just to keep the code reference, I'm gonna leave this code in here, and I'm going to create a new list with view model dot advice collection. We're going to ID each advice, and we can use the key path so we can reach out to the slip and each ID for the slip, and that's actually going to uniquely identify each of the advice. And we can get an advice here. We're going to take that and display it inside the text. So an advice dot, and we need slip and the advice. There we go. And let's go ahead and change the font to be title. The refreshable stays same. Basically, refreshable stays where, like, we are fetching the new advice every time we refresh. And let's go ahead and pull to refresh now, and we should get we should be able to retain our old advice, and we should actually get the new one added at the top. Okay, so this is how we can actually keep growing the list of advice, and we can keep them and check them out later. Okay, all right, so with that, we have reached the end of this video, and in this video we built a simple app to understand how pull to refresh functionality can be implemented in SwiftUI using a simple modifier called Refreshable. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in another video course. Thank you.